everyone. Thank you for joining us for Uncovering the Cycle, an interview with Shalene Gupta, the author of The Cycle. And welcome, Shalene. Thank you for joining us today to share about your book. Shalene is the author of The Cycle, Confronting the Pain of Periods and PMDD, which is deeply researched going into the history of PMDD, and also working, relationships, all of that. I'm going to read you just a quick little quote from it. The cycle isn't just about the menstrual cycle, but also about the socio-political cycles that surround PMDD, the never-ending loop of social stigma against menstruation that means menstrual disorders go untreated, adding more stigma to menstruation, the way knowledge about menstrual disorders goes on to feed sexist stereotypes, and the endless barriers to diagnosis and treatment. So before I ask Shalene some questions, I want to explain a personal note of this book, The Impact on My Life, is that Shalene interviewed me at the end of 2022, I believe, for her book. And we met on Zoom, and I felt like I was just like rambling off all this random stuff. And a bit of it got included in the book, and she really heard what I was saying, even though I wasn't quite sure what I was saying about PMDD, as we know we have those times. And before she sent out some like pre-read copies to folks in the community, I'd been a bit disenfranchised with what role I could play in the PMDD community and what impact I could make. And then reading her book kind of reinvigorated my own passion for this community and this work. So I feel like it's a new cycle you're starting with people like me, and hopefully people that read your book, that there's a lot to be done here, that there's more than just our own personal experience, but contributing to the collective experience. So thank you so much, Shalene. So let's get into it. Let's just dive in. I want to know, how did writing this book come to be? So you were experiencing PMDD yourself, and then where did it start that you wanted to write about it and write this particular book?
Exactly. And first of all, I just want to say Brett is way too modest. The things she had to say about PMDD blew my mind, and they were so creative, and they actually shaped how I thought about having to live with disorder. And we'll get more into that later. So in terms of writing the book, I was diagnosed in spring of 2020, had never heard of PMDD before then. So it completely blew my mind. And more than that, I was just so frustrated that I had gone through this for so many years and had no idea. And so I'm a writer by training. That is my career. And in the fall of 2020, I began to get these paragraphs in my head, and almost like this work plan of, if I was going to write a book, this is what it would look like. And for the first time in my life, I was like, no, I do not want to write this book. These memories are so painful. There are people who have gone up to me who have been like, PMDD is hard, but I haven't had to struggle with the rage portion. And I had terrible rage. I did terrible things. These are things that I'm ashamed of. I carry guilt. I feel incredibly vulnerable about. I've spent a lot of my life like just masking these things. And the idea of having to put this on paper was it. I think I'm turning red right now because it's painful.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I just felt like my husband was actually like, you need to do this. You should do this. So I actually put it together. And when I first sent the book proposal to my agent, who is this wonderful middle-aged man that I really admire and respect, I sent it to him, and then he freaked out because I was just like, I have sent him more about my menstrual cycle and my relationships than anyone else knows. So I ran out of my apartment in January and ran around in circles calling my best friend, screaming. And she was like, well, if the neighbors don't think you're nuts already, they probably do now. So that was that. But even after I got the contract, I froze for a month. I started thinking about, okay, I have to write this. And I was just like, I can't. And I actually got to the point where I had to work with a media coach, and she said, what are you doing this book for? And I thought about myself at the age of 24 and these terrible fights I had with my partner. Um, at that time, I was in grad school in a dorm, and both of the people on either side of my room moved out after a semester because I was having such
Oh
awful,
no.
like I am a pretty quiet person. And it would have meant the world to me to realize at the time that maybe I wasn't bad or rude or inconsiderate, or just I was really trying my best and something was wrong. That led to the cycle.
So you wrote it in, like you finally got to get over that last hurdle was thinking back to like who you were before and what you were struggling with.
And what it would have meant to me, because I just thought if I didn't know, and I have the privilege of living in a city with a great medical system. I'm related to doctors and scientists. I had really good care, really good access. And I didn't learn about this until I was in my 30s. There's got to be other people out there who are undiagnosed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no idea.
Mm. So how did it come to be like the particular direction you were going to take with this story? Like you definitely layer your own experiences, especially with your relationships throughout it. But how did it unfold to write about this kind of like bigger issue going on about the PMDD problem?
I mean, I definitely wanted it to kind of be this almost like this PMDD 101 book.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was in the process of also educating myself about PMD, just, what is it? Why have we never heard about it? What is this complex history? Um, Kind of like enough that you can have a conversation about it. And then I also interviewed a bunch of people because I knew my experience was just one of many. And I tried to capture a variety of experiences,
Mm-hmm.
but even then, like I was running up against a word limit. I really had to pick and choose. There's still so many stories where I'm like, oh, I wish I could have included that.
Part two.
And except part two. And people are writing to me and they're like, oh, you didn't capture this, or I went through this. And I'm just like, ah, yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I could add like extra chapters.
There's really so much to it. Like I was speaking with some of the peer supporters on our team yesterday, and they were talking about in their groups, they hear these kind of common themes of like emotions of shame and guilt and amnesia about their PMDD experiences. And it's like it really is so complex of what we go through because it affects our whole lives. It's not necessarily even just the premenstrual time, but how it affects us fully. So there really is a lot to it. What was when you were getting diagnosed? You hadn't heard about PMDD before, right? And then you learned about it. And did you have any light bulb moments in the theme of our PMD Awareness Month that informed kind of what you were going to talk about, like the menstruation stigma and the PMS history? Any kind of like light bulb moments in your research that came up?
I think my personal epiphany is when I started the book. Um, for whatever reasons, I was really vehemently anti-SSRIs. It had come up in my 20s when I was struggling in grad school. And the psychiatrist and I sat down and she was like, I'm anti-SSRI. I don't want to prescribe them lightly. And I was like, great, that sounds great. Me too. And then, it turns out that SSRIs worked for me. So in some ways, as I was writing the book, I was going through this journey where my entire relationship with how I thought about mental health and SSRIs was changing immensely. And
Mm.
uh, that was just a huge deal because I had to kind of rewrite my narrative and examine all these fears and stigmas I had around treatment. And I've kind of done this 180 and I'm like, oh, it's been wonderful. It's changed. It's given me my life back. It's meant that I
Mm-hmm.
have a relationship that's working. And now, like, when I see other people suffering, I'm like, I don't know if SSRIs work for you. They might not. There's a lot of people that they don't. But
Mm-hmm.
if you can find a treatment that works, why bare knuckle it through? Whereas in the past, I was like, I'm going to get on top of this. I'll just try harder next month. I try hard at lots of things. Surely I'll get it the next month. And I never did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I when you mentioned that, I went through a similar thing. Like my PMDD started when I was young, and I didn't want medications and was so resistant. And then they did help me for different parts of it, and also thinking about mental health, like how we hold those stigmas that come from our societies that don't necessarily need to be there, and then we hold them against ourselves, and we think we just need to try harder. So yeah, it's interesting to overcome that ultimately, on top of the menstrual health side of things too, that this issue straddles both of those.
I have asthma, and I do a lot of comparing what it's like to manage asthma versus PMDD, and no one has ever, I mean, okay, some people are like assholes and they're like, oh, just try harder with the
Just
asthma, but
breathe.
there's an understanding that, like asthma's not your fault. You don't need to like try harder.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You won't need your inhaler. It's like take your inhaler, carry it around with you. That same acceptance doesn't exist for mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And no one is like, maybe you should try like sniffing some lavender oil, your asthma will go away. But I've had numerous people say things like, have you tried yoga for your PMDD? And it's like, I love yoga. It has not.
Yeah, maybe it helps you feel a teeny bit better in the moment, but it's not some
Exactly.
cure. Someone in the comments says, don't forget crystals. No. And not to say that all those alternative
Right.
things aren't supportive, but it's kind of just the perspective we have on these health things.
I feel that I had lucky talismans. I had my like lucky alarm clock.
Yeah.
Thing. Like lucky alarm clock is now broken.
I love them. Like I have my lucky things. I had crystals, and they
Yeah,
do support me in some respects.
right.
So yeah, it's a balance. And I think we can't be telling other people like what they need to be doing, but that's just the natural tendency.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's where I get salty when people are like,
Mm-hmm.
well, your SSRIs don't work. And it's like, I'm not going to comment on what you do. Don't comment on what I do.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing. I do want to talk about um, something that you went into a lot in your book, but I have personal connection, is that when I was in college, I studied psychology, and we had a psychology of women course, and this was in 2016 or so. So PMDD was in the DSM at that time, though not as much awareness. And we had this kind of discussion topic talking about, should PMDD be a diagnosis? And they brought up the controversy with Seraphim, the rebranded SSRI, which are all like valid controversial topics. Like they are like, that's weird. But then that this psychology of women was trying to get us to think like, did we just kind of over pathologize? And as a person who I just was starting to come to know about PMDD at that time, I was like, what? Like, you want me, a 20-year-old, to like decide how I stand on this diagnosis? Like, it was so strange. Yeah, and I'm not sure what the question is, but I guess, how did it land for you when you were learning about the controversy surrounding the PMDD as a diagnosis, and talking with some of those advocates for a different
Oh my
way
God.
of looking at it?
I'm just so fascinated that you had to go through sitting in the class about
Yeah.
this. Wow.
Luckily, it was an online class, so.
I, I found it really hard because on the one hand, so first of all, I'm a huge people pleaser. I get really easily turned around. Like if you tell me a story, like I fully like believe you, and I'm like, okay, okay, that's how the world works. So, I had the privilege. So for those of you who don't know, in the 1980s, there was this huge controversy about whether or not PMDD was real. Should it go in the DSM? And there were essentially two camps. One was a bunch of clinicians and researchers who said, we're starting to see evidence of this. And then there were also a bunch of mental health advocates and professionals and clinicians who were like, this will stigmatize women. This is tantamount to saying that anyone who menstruates is crazy. And what you sort of get is this confluence of many different cultural forces. You get sexism, you get the fact that the research kind of wasn't quite there at the time. They didn't know what caused PMDD. They could just observe it. They didn't have tight definitions. So it gets really, really complicated. And also, if you think about what was going on in the 1980s in terms of women's rights and what was happening, it's a very valid concern to suddenly hear psychiatrists being like, well, some women, have some hormonal issues with their mental health. So, I had the privilege of talking to people on both sides of the camp. And I was really nervous, especially talking to the ones who built their careers on saying PMDD doesn't exist, it's not valid. And up until like 2019, there were some statements on some organizations sites of we don't support PMDD. And these women that I interviewed were I mean, they're so incredible. They have done so much for women's rights. They're just so strong. And especially at a time when, like, they were telling me some of their personal stories and the amount of things they heard about in the workforce and about women and the way they stuck their necks out. I mean, one of them was like a menstrual course educator who's gone on to teach people across the country about menstruation and the history of it when people were like really against her talking about this stuff. And they were fantastic to me and really just such smart, lovely people. But it was really hard because then we'd get to this issue of PMDD and they'd be like, it doesn't exist. And I'd be sitting here going, am I letting down a team? Am I a bad feminist? And feeling like I was disappointing these women that I just really looked up to and really respected. Um, and it's hard. Like I would get turned around. I would leave these interviews feeling quite ashamed, quite guilty. Like maybe, okay, maybe I should stop taking my meds and it'll be better next month, or I'm just making it up. And it was complicated. I actually just recently wrote an article for Time laying out this controversy. And I woke up to a couple emails that were like, you're anti-woman, you hate woman, and like, and it was just, it's hard hearing.
Yeah, it's this is definitely not a black and white thing. It's like it's so gray. Like you're not anti-woman in any respect, and the idea that like that you want women who are struggling to get help is like so supportive of all women and people assigned female at birth. Uh, it is hard because it's more a critique of the way we establish kind of diagnoses, particularly like mental health diagnoses, because they're not necessarily tied to a specific like gene mutation or whatever it might be. It is like a categorical diagnosis describing what's happening. So it's fascinating. But when you were writing about people like Paul Kaplan and whatnot that were giving these kind of very differing views, I really appreciated how much you humanized them and still saw the grayness of that they're not just these kind of stewards of a whole different viewpoint, that we're all just having our own perspectives adding to the conversation.
And they did so much for women and women's rights. I wouldn't in no way want to dishonor that work. And who knows? I'm sure there are things that I have not gotten right or don't understand. And in a few, in maybe 20 years, people will be like, Shalene Gupta did not understand these things.
You'll be all over. You'll be in the next history of PMDD book.
Next generation, oh my God.
That'll be wild. It really will be wild to see what happens. Because the diagnosis and the DSM kind of as its own page has only been in there for 11 years. And then
awesome comments and discussion in the chat. So I'm like about like, why are we categorizing this as mental health? Why not hormonal health? And honestly, I don't have a really good answer to that. I interviewed a bunch of experts who were kind of going back and forth of like, we need actually more people studying the intersection of both. But I think it also just shows like, I wish we could get to a point as a society where there isn't a stigma about anything. It's just something is not working for your life. Here are your different options. And it says nothing about you.
Yeah, exactly. Some of that is the internalized kind of stigma we hold of like, are we crazy? Should I just be trying harder? And then if we have something like you say, like asthma, like you never question that because it's a physical thing. And PMDD is certainly physical too. It just manifests through our minds and our behaviors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just looking through the chat too.
I know, guys, like this chat is so fascinating. Like
you've sparked a really critical conversation. I've been like waiting for this story to get out there this whole time I've been working in the PMDD space, and I feel like I've done tiny blogs about history, and I'm like, whoa, this is bigger than I have the time to write about. So then you brought it brought it here. And I'm so glad. I think it's a gift to the community, this story
Thank you. I
that
appreciate
you
that.
tell. So how did writing the book impact your own experience of PMDD and mental health? Like, did it trigger tougher episodes, or did it like bring more healing to you? Like, how did it evolve?
I mean, I like to joke that it was cheaper than therapy because so I had like a 1 year deadline to write the book. And I really had to delve back into the past. And so in some ways I felt like I was rewriting my identity from asshole, bad person, out of control, poor emotional control to ill, or I have like I have a chronic illness. Um, and I had a lot of big emotions around that varied. Some days it felt like I was taking the easy way out and I wasn't taking responsibility. Other days I just sort of felt failed by society, where like, why did no one tell me this? Why wasn't there help? Why isn't it easier to access? Who else is suffering? Fear, what would have happened to me if I couldn't have gotten help earlier? Sometimes I think about the shadow life. Like I had a relationship that I really cared about just vanish, um, because of these PMDD fights. And I wonder if I hadn't got treatment, what would have happened with my husband? Um, so I would write and then I would lie awake in bed with all of this going through my head. I'd crawl out of bed, like rewrite. Um, there was just a lot of coming to terms with the past and just apologizing to people, particularly my ex, apologizing to sometimes myself, and just trying to be okay with like, this is the past and I have a present and I have a future. My poor editor though, like there were times when I think I turned in like 3 pages about my desk and she was like, Shalene, like, you're clearly working through something here. And I was, it was like some more percent. She's like, this could be a paragraph. And I was like, yes, I agree.
That's funny. It was your therapy. I mean, I think that too. I write a lot and it's certainly therapy.
Absolutely.
Mm. So, what has the reception been like to your book in different spaces? Like you've been featured on several articles. So, what is the kind of the critical reception, but also people in the community? How has that been going for you?
Oh my gosh, Brett, oh, you have my heart. Like Brett told me she would ask me this question. And ever since I've been like, therapy. So I'm going to break this up into sort of like 3 different angles. One is just the PMDD community itself. And I was utterly terrified when this book came out, like in the weeks leading up to the release. I was just like, can I say this is YA fantasy? None of it actually happened. There's another person called Shalene Gupta. Like, is this going to ruin my career? I'm a business journalist most of the time, and business is not really an area where they like you to get into like your mood and your hormones and your menstrual cycle. Um, so it was incredible to just be getting notes from people who were like, you've made me feel seen. You're outlining my experience, or I didn't have the same experience, but I'm just so grateful that you wrote this and
Mhm.
so life-giving. So there's the second, there's another angle to that, which is just when you publish a book, there's always kind of this pressure to get publicity, to let people know what's going on. And it's really hard to get the megaphone for PMDD. Most people haven't heard of it. If they have heard of it, you've got the double stigma of menstrual health, which, I've had people turn like bright red in front of me, or someone like, I told a man like I was writing a book about menstrual health, and he just started singing awkward. And I was like, okay, you know what's more awkward? Both of us going.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been tough getting it in articles, getting like I emailed it to a bunch of book reviewers and they were like, we want to write about this. We can't get an editor to approve or publish the article. And when I did get articles, it was very much people wanted certain things from them, like an explainer of what is PMDD. You can't like just assume that people know.
Mhm.
So that part has been really, really tricky. And anytime someone is willing to write about PMDD, I'm just so grateful. And then the third part is anytime you write about something, there are going to be people who disagree or who have opinions. And I want there to be a discussion. Like, I am one person, the way I see things is not the way other people see things. I've been lucky in that SSRIs worked for me, but for a lot of people, they don't work and they've been terrible. But I I had to take a step back sometimes from the conversation because, again, I am a people pleaser and I see things and I'm just like, oh my God, why didn't I put that in? I'm such an embarrassment. Or someone like really hated the book and I'm just crushed and I'm like, oh my God, am I doing more harm? Should I stop writing? Like, the last thing I wanted to do is make things worse. And I think the latest when I wrote about the controversy, getting these comments about like, you hate women, you're setting women back. There's a real fear of like, that is the last thing I'd ever want to do. So it's been tricky trying to figure out having PMDD and dealing with people have opinions, because I talk to my writing friends and a lot of them are like, yes, people suck. And some of them are like, well, you just block and delete and it's fine. It goes over you. And I wish I was like that one day.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you overcame like the real struggles of that to get the book out, because the more voices we add to this can grow the conversation, can grow the awareness, and hopefully get us to a place of more awareness, acceptance, and more people like us doing well. So it's all part of it.
I totally want to echo that, Brett. Like, if you're in the audience and you've been sitting here with like feeling like you have nothing to add and you're so ashamed or something, speak your truth. Like, tell your story. Oh my goodness. The amount of healing I've found in people just taking the time to say things, it's been life-changing for me. Like, what keeps me going is hearing other people's stories. And you're going to do the exact same thing for someone else. Like, we are in this together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I personally have an easier time online talking about things, but then in person, for me personally, I don't want to talk as much about it. But it seemed like you speak about it, and I love it. Like, you're like, I talk to my guy friends, and then we get in these text conversations that might devolve into other places. But yeah,
It's a personality issue, unfortunately. I'm not very good at holding my tongue, for better or for worse.
I think that's good. I need to let go of my tongue a little bit. um, okay. Was curious if you want to share what, at this point, what helps in your PMDD journey? What helps you cope and manage, including the treatments, but also things you do in your life, things you do in your relationships and your work? Any kind of thoughts you want to share on that with people listening today?
That's a good question, because I do want to say, like, of course, treatment. And that has been by far the biggest difference for me. But second of all, also just knowing that I have PMDD. So I'm going through IVF right now. There's like zero information on the intersection of PMDD and then what happens to you when you're being pumped full of hormones like a little chicken.
Need that
Yeah.
for area of research.
Right. And I had some like major crashes that I wasn't expecting. I was like, I don't get this. This is follicular phase. I should be in the clear. Um, and I started like Googling IVF and PMDD and just reading like people's stories. And some people said they were going through the same thing. And it was just like, oh my God. And that just changed everything, because I always kind of go through, I feel like when I'm spiraling, it starts to externalize to my life where I'm just like, what do I need to fix? Is it my relationship? Is it my career? Um, and it was so helpful to just, okay, Google these meds, like mood, mood swing effects, like, okay. And it's just like, all right, I just need to get through the next half hour. And, like, I'm hanging out with my dad right now, and my poor dad, because I just like burst into tears in the car and he was like, what's wrong? I was like, it's the hormones. They'll be fine. And then in half an hour, it was okay. And
Mm-hmm.
I was able to go on with my life. And I just, suspended, like, I'm going to take the rest of the day off. I don't have to do anything. And there was a certain amount of guilt because I was like, oh, but then I'll never have the career I want. And I was like, no, 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 no. We're just going to take care of ourselves. And then within an hour, I was able to go back and do everything I wanted because I'd given myself the space to cry, to feel my things, and to just accept this is my body and this is what it needs, and I'm going to give it what it needs.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I personally feel that's such a powerful piece. It's surprising like how much like giving yourself a little bit of grace and allowing yourself to experience that like tiny little breakdown without adding on the storyline of shame or I mean you did have a little guilt and that's totally natural, we're humans. But yeah, yeah, that is so powerful.
Well, it's tough because I think we live in this culture which really prioritizes productivity. Um, it, it's kind of like built on the metrics that imagine you don't have a period or you don't have issues with a period or your period is something that's very tidy and dainty that causes no issues at all. And we don't have other paradigms of thinking about what does it look like to live a successful, fulfilled, whatever that might mean to you, life with something like PMDD. And what does success mean in that? I was being interviewed by a young woman who just blew my mind. She is in college and she's starting this nonprofit for PMDD and like does that on top of like schoolwork. And then she was like, is PMDD a life sentence? Like, am I not going to achieve as much as my peers? And I was just like, you have achieved so much. The fact that you're asking this or feel sentenced to feeling like you're going to live a lesser life breaks my heart. Like, we need new narratives because she is a hero. She is so incredible, as are you, Brett, and so many, like everyone here. And we need to be able to embrace the things that we do that are incredible and be recognized for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and be willing to accept ourselves and for the way we operate it doesn't need to it doesn't need to fit into the kind of definitely a male setup of like not having this kind of cycling changes within us.
100%.
Yeah. Kelly says neoliberal capitalism and the patriarchy are a deadly combo for PMDD. Yeah, it's, I mean, but this is why this is a big story. It's like, yeah, it's these factors that happen in our world that impact us in our little lives experiencing symptoms and not and then it blows into a bigger snowball because of all those pressures from our society that aren't supportive of us.
Absolutely. I mean, even this, the culture of like, oh, I stayed up all night and I pulled an all-nighter. I used to feel so guilty because I will not pull an all-nighter. Like
Mm-hmm.
ever since college, I've been extremely anal about having a schedule. I work ahead of time. And I think it's because subconsciously, even before I knew PMDD, I have a very painful period. I knew that there's going to be a time where I can't work and I'm tired. So I need to plan. Um, and somehow it's never seen as that, that's never lauded, where it's like, oh, you have planned out everything so you can still show up. It's, oh, you didn't pull the all-nighter. Yes, I was sleeping for 8 hours because I need to.
Yeah, and it's healthy to get that sleep, whether you have PMDD or nothing. It makes us better people to actually have these kind of healthy habits. Yeah. So I do want to say now with everyone here that's if you popped in later to add any specific questions you have for Shalene in the Q&A. We're gonna get to some of those or specific topics you wanted to talk about. So I do want to ask now, like, what is next for you? What are you working on right now? Are you writing another book in a different topic or on PMDD or where are you at?
That's a great question. So two things. First of all, I'm starting a newsletter because I turned in my book and then these really cool papers came out and I was like, oh, like I can't include them. Um,
Mm.
so first up, I just did an interview with Professor Lisa Hansu at Johns Hopkins, who has this really cool study on kind of like getting out why SSRIs are not working for some people. And
Mm.
I tried to read the paper and I was like, oh, I don't understand anything. But Lisa Hansu was incredible about sitting down, explaining this to me. And the goal with this newsletter is to take a paper and really just translate it into language that people can understand, because so much of the dialogue about PMDD is happening at the research clinician level.
Mm.
And a lot of that is not easy to understand.
No.
There are still times when I'm terrified I'm going to say something wrong about PMDD and the biology behind it because, I've read these papers, I've read them multiple times, but I'm not a scientist and I don't have that bone deep knowledge of hormones. And I also feel like not understanding that biology is leading to, it makes us vulnerable to people who come in with treatments that don't make sense. Or it was really hard. I was on a podcast with someone who was saying that PMDD is caused by a change in hormone levels, or an imbalance, sorry, and that's not what PMDD is caused by. And it was really hard because I knew when you have a journalist talking to a clinician who's been in the office for 20 years, I have like zero credibility in this conversation. And so we just need to get to a point where the basics are really instilled, because they're not being instilled in our heads in health class.
They certainly should be. I'd love if PMDD and other menstrual health conditions were covered more broadly in those health classes when we're younger.
We're not even covering the menstrual cycle. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Like it just, yeah.
Yeah. So you're working on translating that paper? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, I love that phrase, like translating it to I don't know, like layperson language. Yeah. So I'm working on that newsletter, and then working on a novel, still trying to figure out my next nonfiction book idea. So yeah, we'll see. I definitely miss working on a nonfiction book. Like it was such an honor and such a joy to work on the cycle and just get to chat with so many people from the community, because one of the things that blew me away is how incredible people are in the PMDD community. I was super worried about doing these interviews, and people just took me in with open arms, and afterwards would email me or check in on me. And I wish there was some way to communicate this to the greater world, because I think there gets to be this stigma of like, oh, PMDD means that you're angry or you're depressed or you're unstable. But the people with PMDD that I've talked to are so smart, such emotionally high, such high EQ, because frankly, when you don't know about it, you have to figure out other ways to make your life work. And people have been really creative and really scrappy, and I think they're not getting credit for that. Like everyone I talked to had incredible emotional repair skills. It was truly amazing.
How many people did you include in your book, like that from your interviews?
Oh God. I interviewed about 100. I don't know how many made it in. I didn't actually count,
There
but
was a lot.
it was not all 100. Like there wasn't enough room for that. Yeah.
But they all informed the whole story.
Each and every single person.
Yeah. I really liked that's how you went about it, like getting different stories and telling it through your own sections about your life, but also everyone else's life. It's a really nice tribute, particularly the section about IAPMD and Sandy, who had other things going on, so she couldn't be here today. And you, it was really sweet. That's chapter 8. If you haven't read it yet.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, IAPMD does so much for the community, and the amount of information that you guys are putting out, it's the first stop shop. So truly, like, it is a community, and it was a pleasure to work with you guys, and I'm glad that you were available for interviews.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that. That I feel like things come out sometimes that are like they do things like outside the kind of existing community, which is fine. But it was really cool that you were like really like inside the community and valued the space and all that's available there. Yeah. So that was really cool. Because I told Shalene this, but I knew like so many of the people that she interviewed. It was really fun for me to read personally, because I'm like, I work with her, like she's a peer supporter, that's a researcher, we talk to all the time. So
And I think the thing is PMDD can feel so isolating because I feel really strong connection to people online, but in my regular life, I don't know that many people who have PMDD. And And the more I learn about it, the more I'm aware of this cycle on my mood in my life. So I'm constantly like telling my friends, I'm like, oh, I'm in my follicular phase.
Mm,
Oh, like I'm like 3 days out from my period. It's gonna be a rough ride. And then there are times when I just feel so self-conscious because I'm like, do they want to know this much about my period? Like maybe this is like
mm, mm-hmm,
too much, the fact that I'm always keeping track. Um, and that can just feel really isolating because I don't want to be the period person who's boring all of my friends with
mm,
the cycle update.
mm,
And that's where having community who gets it is just really incredible.
mm-hmm. I felt that same way bringing up cycle things, but then thinking like if you were my friend telling, I mean, you are my friend, telling me like I'm at ovulation now, I'd be like, cool, like how are you feeling? Like me too. So I personally would enjoy it. And those are more of the friends I want to keep around.
But cheers to that. And absolutely, like I do feel like, oh, so one thing Brett blew my mind about is she has this incredible statement about how PMDD doesn't have to be a death sentence, or it means that you're doomed to have to get an invasive surgery if you don't want that surgery. Some people do, and that's fine. And it really just made me think about silver linings to PMDD. And I don't want to disrespect or dishonor anyone's suffering, but I've had to make my peace with like, I have this illness. I would prefer not to, frankly, if I had a choice, but no one gave me one. So how do I make it work for myself? What are the narratives I can use to reframe this so I don't feel like I got shafted and I'm bitter? Um, and Brett was just so helpful with that in terms of pointing out like the positive aspects. And it made me think about, again, for me, PMDD manifests as rage. And most of the time, I'm pretty easygoing. I like, if you pay me pennies and just say, you did a great job, Shalene, I'll be like, yes,
Mhm,
happy. And with PMDD, I was like, no, 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 like, I need to get paid enough to pay rent. Like I need a raise. It got me to stand up for myself in relationships and say, and like I can't say the process was always good, but it has helped me recognize when my boundaries are being violated. And I think, again, we live in a society where women are not necessarily taught that their needs are important, that they deserve to be honored. And
mhm,
PMDD has helped me respect myself. And it's helped me disrespect myself because of some of these issues, but it's also taught me to defend myself.
yeah, there's certainly are silver linings to it. And like you say, with the high EQ and being able to manage emotions and incorporate them into our lives. Like I think this is this new way of how the world's going to be run with more emotionality, and I think it's going to be a good thing. Help us expand.
And I think because, of my husband made this joke, he's like, Shalene, you're not good at doing things you don't want to do. I have where like part of that, I saw somebody mentioning the PMDD ADHD
Mhm,
connection. And I say
mhm,
like, yes, I also have ADHD. So raised hands to people who have that. I've had to arrange a life that I really like. Like I love
mm,
my, so I fight for it every month. But I have been in jobs where I didn't feel passionate about it. And I think with PMDD, it would have been really easy to totally check out. Like I adore my husband. We're a really good match. Um, and PMDD made it so that I couldn't be in a relationship that didn't work this well. We
mhm,
weren't as good of a fit. And I am grateful for that because I think it would be easy to say, I can put up with a little more.
mhm. Yeah, now you're in one that is better. So you married Ashir, like you're the book, he's your boyfriend, right?
Yeah, I got married. Like,
You
what am I
got,
doing?
you got married.
Yeah,
I
I
love
got
it.
married. One of my friends was like, you should make the wedding the end of the book. But I was like, we've had so
Oh.
many narratives where there's a fairy tale and they lived happily ever after. And I still have PMDD. Like,
It's
Share
not
and I,
all fairy tale all the time.
we actually had an argument like last night. I was like, Share, are you kidding me? Like, brain, are you kidding me? But we are happily married despite that.
That's amazing. Yeah. Also, your chapter on relationships. I think you ended it with a scene with you and Ashir like getting ice cream and pizza. And I was like, yes, that's amazing. And also, you talked to Aaron, who's like kind of a leader in the partner support community. And it was just tears. I was reading it on an airplane. Like, just there is love in this space. And there are partners out there who see us
Yeah.
beneath the rage episodes, the depression, or whatever it is. Like, we are still beautiful, wonderful people worthy of all the love in the world, and a happy marriage and all that. So that's really exciting to hear.
And the people who can see that are just the people worth doing anything for. I feel like I have such a strong community behind me. And it's because these are people who understand, who are okay with my episodes. Um, I've never been great at like keeping friends who are like, okay, everything has to be happy and positive all the time, and you need to be successful, because like, half the time I'm a hot mess, right? And my friends are people who are okay with that and who support that, and
Mm-hmm.
it's strong relationships.
Yeah, they're the good ones.
Yeah, exactly. Keep them close.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think we'll get into some audience questions. I'm going to pop up the Q&A, and I feel that the first one is there research on what causes PMDD? And I don't think that's what we'll address here, but there definitely is. And we're having a treatment webinar on Wednesday, April 17th, that might be a good one to attend for that.
Oh my God, guys, you should go
on
to
our
that.
website.
Dr. Tori, amazing.
Mm-hmm. She's in the book.
And Sandy, the head of Iapmd, just sent me the ebook, and it's like evidence-based. The language is so clean and clear.
Yeah,
I can understand it. I'm like not a science person. Totally go to that.
Yeah, so that's a good one. There is on our FAQ on the website, you can also search for causes, because there are definitely things that research is illuminating as those like biological causes. Autumn says, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's such a sweet message.
Oh, thank you, Autumn. I'm sending hugs right back.
Reading Heather's message, to hear voices from the non-binary/trans community. I really agree, because I think that's, and you did include people who don't identify as women, and how that kind of, for some, increases dysphoria around gender, and then for others that it didn't. So I think that's a really fascinating aspect. So if you're an AFAB person, a non-binary trans person in this community, maybe take a page from Shalene's book and get your own story out there as well.
We need more of the stories. Like immediately, right during my book launch, someone came up to me and she's like, my partner is trans, and he has found that testosterone has really helped his PMDD. I'm just like, oh my goodness, like I hadn't come across that, and I haven't looked into the research there, but that was really cool to me.
Mm-hmm. Seeing, is PMDD hereditary? And you mentioned that in your book, just the research.
Yeah, so researchers aren't, oh God, there's a statistic about this, which I'm forgetting, but I want to say they're like 30 to 80% sure, which is a huge range. But it basically means they think that it's a bit hereditary.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people I interviewed mentioned that they do think it's hereditary. I'm convinced that my mom had PMDD too, so I would not be surprised.
I'm curious about, like, should I have a daughter? Like, how, and if it is hereditable, like, how will it be that I'd be her mother, and kind of like she'd know about this stuff, and I hope I'd frame it in a way that she doesn't need to be afraid of it, and how that might impact the whole experience for myself, for any of us out there with daughters.
100%, like that conversation. I mean, I was interviewing younger people who, and I felt so terrible because they, they knew that I was talking about PMDD, but they didn't know that much about periods. And I was interviewing them about menstrual education. They were like, is my period gonna ruin my life? Just like, oh, there needs to be ways to talk about that.
Yeah, it's sensitive, because when we bring up like health education, we don't just want to lay it on like, here's all the things you could experience. You could have PMDD, you could have endo, like you could have PCOS. And it's like, as like a 12-year-old, like that's a lot. But not that those things don't exist, but that they're not necessarily going to happen.
Yeah.
Another area to think critically about. Another person saying PMDD and perimenopause, and/or PMDD and IVF. As Shalene said about her own IVF journey, has been intertwined with PMDD. I think those are certainly topics to address in a webinar that we have next Saturday. with peer supporters. One of them is in perimenopause, and she wants to talk about how PMDD and how that's been related. That might be a good one to come to as well.
Oh, I want, because those are the two topics that are top contenders for my newsletter as well. I really want to take deep dives into both of them.
Yeah, I think it's all those areas that are critical to our life, of like aging as women and then going through something like IVF, pregnancy, postpartum, all those stuff that are super big aspects of life, and how we're going to feel living with PMDD.
100%. I mean, even just, you know, I've had to Google I've started Googling my medications now. I was taking something for asthma and having anxiety attacks, and Googled this medication and was like, oh, this has mood side effects that nobody told me about. So there needs to be like an entire, like, what can you expect from different aspects of your life? Prednisone?
Prednisone?
I'm seeing on the chat, people are like, was it singular? It was.
Is there a connection with neurodivergence and PMDD? What has your research come across?
You know, so there's been a lot of talk about whether or not, you know, there's PMDD and ADHD and they overlap. So the last I've heard on it is there are a few small studies, but they are small enough that we can't yet say for sure that there's a correlation, but a lot of the community mentions correlations. And again, PMDD research does lag behind other disorders. So some of these questions, which you'd think we'd have clear answers to, we're still looking for, or the evidence is in the community, but you know, clinically, we don't necessarily have the studies.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing too. A lot of community evidence and the research is lagging behind, but I think the community evidence kind of leads what the research is going to go into.
Yeah.
Let's see. Surgery changed my life. Not seen any talk about raising children with PMDD. I know my rage affected my girls. Yeah. I think that's certainly the parenting piece, because I was talking to a teacher in the community, and she's ultimately left her job because it wasn't right for her, but she's like, you can't really be around all those kids and having a PMDD episode. And it's like, yeah. I think you did address a bit of parenting in your book though too, from some of your interviews.
I did, yeah. I spoke to some parents, and a lot of them mentioned just having to take some space during those times, and then expressing guilt. And you know, I'm not a parent, so you know, I don't want to like weigh in too heavily, but I do feel like sometimes with PMDD, the ways you manage look a little bit different. And I hope there's more space for that, that you don't have to always 100%. Like, I think we have these really high expectations for what motherhood is. And, you know, if you look at what we expect from fathers in terms of parenting, right? I remember I was at school once and one of my teachers was like, do you guys have fathers? I never see them. Like, they're always at work or stuff. And if we can do that for fathers, then I hope that we can give ourselves some grace of, I'm PMDDing, I need to take a little bit of space from my kid, because what I've learned is like having like with my friends and my parents, I saw a comment about like, how can you be your true self when you have PMDD? So no, it doesn't go well if I'm raging. I've only ever had like 2 friends see the extent of my rage, and it was not great. I'm lucky, those were strong friendships, they recovered. But what I do is kind of let people know, like, hey, I'm not doing so well. I can't really talk right now. I can't show up. And my friends get it, and they're great people who are like, okay, that's okay. Part of being friends or is that I'm just can't handle certain things. And my husband gets that there are times of the month where I can't cope with stress as much, or I'm just gonna be as touchy. And yeah, the hope is that can happen with parenting too.
Yeah, I think I don't have kids myself, but I think they can be incredibly amazing, but also really stress provoking. But I think it's also beautiful if the kids can see what it's like to have more emotional expression, as long as it's framed in an appropriate way. And if anybody wants to share their own thoughts on parenting or other aspects in the comments for people, please do.
I feel very self-conscious as someone without.
Yeah. Yeah, just making my theories about something I have no experience of. Is it the same as cats and dogs? No.
Right. You know, like my dad had a chronic illness when I was growing up, and it was just kind of understood that sometimes dad can't do things. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, like I want my dad to be okay. So,
Mhm. Mrs. Richards is asking that she's nervous about her long-awaited gynecologist appointment coming up and any advice for having that appointment.
oh gosh. So good. And please weigh in the chat too. Weigh in the chat. Like this is such a smart audience with so many great things to say. First of all, just be sure that make sure you have the right fit with a gyno. Like have a doctor who
Mm-hmm.
understands it's just not worth going through it. You are their client ultimately. Um, and then second of all, I do prep work before I go to the doctor. I always like have my bullet point list of things I want to talk about. And then I also have a list of questions. I will still say it is really tough. I had a gynecologist just be like, PMDD is not a thing. With IVF, I think
Mm-hmm.
I, I'm pretty sure some of my nurses don't know what PMDD is, and we're gonna have to have a conversation very soon because they want to put me on a hormone, which is really bad. Like I just flipped out the last time I was on it, and it's gonna be a work in progress. So. And I think this is where the community, like if you have experience with any of these things, if you have tips, you have advice, speak up, tell your story, put it out there on Reddit. We're all learning from each other in the community because what we have is each other.
Mm-hmm. I would add just when I was going through the diagnosis process, I was a bit younger and I was not in a good place. And my mom came to my appointments and she, being a mom, like she wants to fight for me more than maybe I would even be able to. So if you have a person in your life, a mom, a partner, even a friend, like if the communicating is hard for you as it is for me, um, they can be a really great resource to bring, I'd say.
100%. I have brought my partner in and he's a scientist and somehow speaks doctor.
Mm,
There's language.
yeah.
That
And that's interesting too, like coming in as a male partner and a scientist. Also, like,
it's a dynamic for sure.
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
above,
And
he's
that's sometimes what we need to do in this day and age still.
yeah.
So, someone's asking, is there a way to sign up for your newsletter? How would they do
Um,
that?
Yes, it is on my website. Just go to www.shalenegupta.com. There's a newsletter link.
Cool. And I will also send an email after this with the recording, and I'll include the Shalene's book link and her newsletter link.
Oh my gosh, I'm seeing people like saying like, can we connect? And that's amazing. Like everyone connect with each other. Like keep talking. Like stay. This is like, yes, we need each other. And
Yeah.
I'm on Instagram too, if anyone wants to like connect.
Yeah. And it's getting close. I mean, it just turned to the hour, but we can stick around for a bit to ask more questions. Do you have the time, Shalene, for a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely happy to.
Yeah. So if people want to stick around, please do. We'll get through some things. Kelly says, can you talk a little bit more about the format of the book? I'm specifically curious about how other people manage their symptoms apart from SSRIs. I know that I need more sleep during my luteal phase, but also suffer from amnesia.
Yeah, so the book kind of, again, I like to think of it as like PMDD 101. So it goes through sort of like, the biology of like, what do we know about what causes PMDD? The history, what is menstrual stigma? Where did it come from? How did that impact where we are today in terms of not knowing that much about PMDD and that entire debate from the 1980s? And then it also walks through a diagnosis, treatment, various people's experiences with that, a chapter on relationships, how people are handling that, a chapter on work. Um, I'm a perfectionist, so I continue to be like, oh, I wish I'd included this and I wish I'd included that. So yes, if there's something else you wanted to see, please write in and tell me your story because
Mm-hmm.
find more ways to include the things that I didn't get to include because of word count or deadline.
I love the format because you talk so much about the nonfiction side of it, but then it's framed within your own experiences. So yeah, Kelly, grab that book. It's a really good read and a great audiobook that Shalene reads it herself, and she is a beautiful narrator. So if you're more into audio right now, which we all have those phases, you can get that copy as well.
Too bad for it.
I only speak the truth though. How do you share your PMDD with friends and family? I feel so much shame around it and have experienced some gaslighting from family in the past. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I just want to give you a big hug. It's a really good question. And again, I open it up to the chat in terms of how have you shared with friends and family in the past? First of all, I do want to say if there are bad actors in your life, it is okay not to share. I had a long chat with a friend of mine who works in employment law, and it was this really deep discussion around disclosure. And on one hand, disclosure is good for the community, but on the other hand, there may be personal ramifications. So if there's some member in your family who's a gaslighter or something, it may not be worth the conversation. Other people, please weigh in if you feel differently. If there are people who, you can trust to be in good faith, I think it's helpful to send resources because then it's not just your voice. And there's some study that says people don't believe a thing until they've seen it from like 4 different sources. So that's been really helpful. I've been touched. Like someone told me they sent my book to her mother-in-law when their mother-in-law was just like, "How can you hold down a job?" Um, so I think just things that show it's a community. Iapmd has great resources. There's a lot of just Google PMDD, and there's a lot of great one-pagers on medical websites from trusted organizations.
Yeah, I think mentioning it a lot of times and not even in the heat of the moment, but just kind of incorporating it in gradually with these family members. But I think with what Shalene said, some people might be toxic and not great. If they're a family that you can't, that got to be in your life, that's different. But no shame setting your own boundaries. So
Absolutely.
someone is saying they read The Cycle, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, and Woman Code, and all great books. And I'm interested in correct correlations between PMDD, birth control, and our cycles. Do you know of any studies, connections between different types of birth control versus no birth control? Mentioned, yeah, it's in your book, didn't work well for you. How birth control might contribute to PMDD. That's an interesting topic. Because Yaz is one of the FDA approved evidence-based treatments, but that doesn't mean it's appropriate for everyone. Any thoughts on that, Shalene?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is again where I say that the research is behind because there are some hypotheses now that people have different types of PMDD. So responses to different hormone sensitivities. Some people are more sensitive to fluctuations in progesterone, other people in estrogen, some in both. So in my case, Yaz was an absolute disaster. And then I went on to meet somebody from my team who sat me down, my team for the book, who sat me down and was like, Yaz was actually amazing for me. And researchers are still working on trying to, like, I think a lot of the people I talk to, they're like, the next wave we want to figure out is what are these different subtypes? Dr. Torrey kind of compares this to breast cancer, where, in the beginning it was, okay, we know there's breast cancer. Now it's like, oh, we know there's different types of breast cancer, and this is what the treatment is like. And the hope is we get there with PMDD. And that's where it's really important, as a community that we come together, we support our researchers, we advocate so that we can have the funds and the expertise to make sure these studies happen.
Yeah. I think this person read This Is Your Brain on Birth Control by Sarah Hill, and she's kind of the leading research on birth control stuff. So watch that space, watch her Instagram. She's been involved with us in our PMDD community coalition. So people are certainly trying to figure this out. And like Shalene says, it lags behind what we experience as individuals and in the collective. Lucy asks, to me, did your mom have PMDD, Brett? She's on the board, right? My mom, from my experience with her, I don't feel like she had it. And then she would say the same, that that's not something she felt like she experienced. Yeah, so there, it might not have been heritable in my case, but I do have cousins, like several cousins who kind of have gone through the PMDD thing as well. Yeah. PMDD and neurodiversity, ADHD, autism. Yes.
Yeah, I think I covered that with our, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where would I find your newsletter? We're going to send a link.
Let's send a link.
Shalene, do you take medicine for PMDD at the moment? And if so, what do you take? Do you have other ways of coping or other methods that help? Do you think diet makes a difference? Anything more to add on those?
I have thoughts. Fluoxetine, 10 milligrams. I started immediately after ovulation, so like the last 2 weeks of my cycle. I started very skeptical, so I was like, I'm only going to take this for like 2 days before my period, and then like my fights with Ushir kind of went from once a month to like once a season, but that was still too much, and now it's a lot better. I really go back and forth on the diet thing. Um, I went through a phase where I did not eat sugar for a year. And by not eating sugar, I mean no ketchup, no bread, nothing with trace amounts.
Mm.
And this is where I personally have not found anything with diet to be particularly helpful. And this is where I struggle because I do see a lot of things with like just cut out like gluten and dairy and sugar. And by the time you're done, you're left with like you can have water and I don't know, crumbs.
But not gluten crumbs.
Not gluten crumbs or dairy crumbs. And I personally like I get really hungry before my period. And I am a child of the 90s. I grew up with so much internalized shame about my body and food and eating. Like I really am not the poster child for having a great relationship with this here. And I just feel like adding diet on top of everything else when you're already struggling, when there's like no evidence backing it up. I haven't come across studies. None of the researchers I talked to were like, yes, there's this like fail safe, avoid, I don't know, codfish and you'll be fine. I hope it's an area where we can give ourselves more grace, or that's what I've been trying to do. Weirdly enough, fluoxetine cut my food cravings by a lot. Like instead of buying out the entire chocolate aisle now, I only buy like one chocolate bar.
Nice. I want to add a little on diet because I've gone through similar phases of being like, I need to be so strict because this is going to fix me. And my own perspective is like food to me is like nourishment. So it's a foundational place. So if I can nourish myself with kind of those things we know are good for us, like fruits, vegetables, proteins, healthy fats, those kind of things that are just kind of inarguable, that I'm set up for everything going better, my PMDD, my ability to work, my ability to exercise. So think of food more as foundational and not so much as like, this is the diet that's going to fix me. And then also being aware of blood sugar things. So if I'm having a sugary snack, to know how that might impact my mood over the next few hours. And that doesn't mean I don't eat the sugary thing, but it's just like being aware of it, being mindful and keeping that in mind.
You're so much more on top of this than I am because I get really strong craving and I still do like the day before. Like my husband can always tell because we go to the grocery store. It's the holy trifecta of potato chips, chocolate, and chocolate cake. And I've just come to accept it because it's so much like I just feel so much better. There's like this click in my brain that's like, And part of it is if it's, lack of serotonin and that's like helping. So I've really stopped trying to quit sugar and worry about that standard.
Yeah. And allowing yourself to have it and having that joy is a beautiful thing too. So It's very individual. Where can I get the book in the UK?
It should be coming out this month. It's amazing how much
it's not out in the UK?
I don't think so. I didn't realize it would be out later in April, but a friend of mine just told me that in Europe it's shipping in April.
Good. It's coming. Can they get the digital copy?
I believe the digital copy is
All the ins and outs of the book publishing world.
I'm just like, things about publishing where sometimes they don't tell you things.
Oh, Hannah's saying she got it and she lives in Luxembourg.
Oh, good to, I had no idea. Thank you, Hannah. I had no idea it was available in Luxembourg.
And Heather, who's written an anthology, which is called Awfully Hilarious, which we need to get you on in an interview too, Heather. She said it's tricky as well internationally.
Yeah, like I sold World English rights, so I know that it should be out in World English, whatever world, wherever geography World English is.
Hmm. Aaron asks, who Aaron is on our peer support team and our board, and he's in the book as well. He said, what did you learn about PMDD when researching the book that you didn't really appreciate before or surprised you?
Oh gosh, Aaron. Oh, by the way, I want to give Aaron a shout out because he's written this book about partner support and it was just incredible. I believe, I don't know when it's coming. Aaron, let us know when it's coming out. I never remember, but it is hilarious. Like I texted sections to my husband and he was like, these are facts. Uh, so, I think to me it was the whole history of menstrual stigma because I always get curious about like, how do we get here? Why are we at this place where people are suffering from menstrual mood disorders? And I have had so many people say to me, like, please write about menopause. Like, if you have an article about menopause, we can get that in. And to me, it's fascinating because I feel like there are so many people who have periods, and yet it's more acceptable to write about your period fading away. It's like we're backing into this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes to show the strength of the stigma that we're talking about. And so just learning all of these things and okay, the ancient Romans, Pliny the Elder was like menstrual blood poisons dogs. And then, we get into the Middle Ages and it's this idea that women are haunted by demons.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that like having an impact well until the 1970s. So obviously there's just this like cultural weight that's still there that we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with, even though we no longer buy into the science that was conducted at these times.
Mm-hmm. But they carry forward. I You mentioned these boys, I think somewhere in Asia that were learning about it and that they felt like they couldn't talk about it because young boys, like,
Yeah,
I
this
think that was like, what?
happens. There was this study in Taiwan conducted of sixth graders, and these sixth grade boys, the researchers found that whenever they asked their teachers or their sisters or their parents about periods and what they were, they would basically get slapped and told, like, you're an embarrassment, these are really dirty, that's disgusting. And so then these boys adopted the attitude of like, oh God, periods are gross, don't talk about them. Um, and so what that means is then you're raising a generation of men, and let's face it, we live in a
Mm-hmm.
world where many times men end up being our clinicians, our gatekeepers, our politicians who build our infrastructure, our business people, who have been told periods are disgusting and you shouldn't talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
We just keep passing that stigma forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why we need to be really careful about how we talk about this to the next generation and make sure we're not passing on these stigmas. And it's hard. Like I interviewed a young lady who told me, she's like, I really want to learn about my period. But my teacher got up in front of class and she was like, this is really awkward. And the young lady was like, I didn't feel awkward, but now I did. Um, and it's tough because then her mother was like, oh my goodness, you know about periods. Like you should talk to her. And I was like, how did this turn into me being the period educator? Um, and there were a lot of things I just had to think about. Am I passing on these stigmas that I also
Mm-hmm.
too with and absorbed?
Yeah. And that stigma, it's not like we're born with it, it can start young. Like we can learn about these things, like those young boys and the young girls, but the way the next generation, the young people, the children like feel about all this can be changed. And so I'm excited for it, for what comes next.
Exactly. So many great things. Reading the chat comments is so life-giving. Like,
Yeah, it's been really an engaging commentary.
thank you everyone for coming. It's such an honor and a privilege to be part of this community and to be in touch with all of you. And thank you, Brett, for just doing an incredible job and Brett is the one who created this app, which just changed my life in terms of tracking your PMDD symptoms. I didn't even know what rejection sensitivity was until I saw it in her app, and I was like,
well, thank you, Shalene. You say you love compliments. I get nervous with them. But we're all. Oh, and Alyssa, how can I get involved in the PMDD community? In any way you would like. We have a get involved page on the website that lists some things, but you really do what feels aligned. Like if you want to be an advocate on Instagram, like do that. Like if you want to be a peer supporter, come join us. If you want to write the next PMDD book, do it. Like go for it. Like use your talents and your creativity to be in this space. It's a wonderful space to work on with a lot of opportunity.
and it doesn't have to just be writing, you know, we need
No,
more.
yeah.
There's a musician out there who made an album around PMDD. Like I want to see more periods of all types represented in media because we don't see them and then we just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we'll close it out, but thank you so much for everyone who came today and added to the conversation. This has really been an amazing opportunity. I had so much fun. Thank you so much, Shalene, for writing this book, for chatting with me, for chatting with all my friends in this space and putting it out there. I'm excited for you and all you have ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Have a wonderful Saturday. And thank you so much, Brett, for doing the amazing job that you do. And of course, thank you to Iapmd for doing all the work.
All right. Thank you. Everybody have a good day.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.